As you may know, Dead Island 2 released almost 2 years ago now, and it does feel like a lot less than that, I know. And I remember I was planning on buying it and playing it, but for some reason I just never got round to it, like most games. So here I am, finally giving it a go. And if you watch the channel regularly, a lot of the time I don't always go through a series or a franchise in its release order. Like with Borderlands, for example, where I went in reverse order, as in starting at the third game and then ending at the first, with the pre-sequel and the spin-offs afterwards. So it might not be a surprise that I haven't played the first Dead Island game. And luckily the second game is completely different and not connected at all, because it's a totally different story, and it's set, I believe, 15 years from the first setting. I may go back and play the first game. I mean, it came out in 2011, so it will be interesting to see how it does hold up. Now, in terms of Dead Island 2, the game is all set in Los Angeles, so you could be in the suburbs, on Beverly Hills, or the more coastal areas. But of course, it isn't an island, as we know, which you would think by the game's title, but for some reason, it's not set on an island. But I'm not really complaining because it gives more room to add a lot more. I mean, with a small tropical island setting, you're quite limited. I mean, on the topic of the setting and the world, I'd like to mention that it isn't an open world game, which for some reason I just assumed it was beforehand. With it being a modern day release, I was just surprised it hadn't become an open world. But instead, it is a linear story where you unlock more of the map as you go, just bit by bit, which I didn't mind. I actually quite like when it is a linear system, and most open world games nowadays can feel sort of empty, whereas if you limit it down to just smaller areas, more focus and detail can go into them. Now, the story is around 13 to 16 hours in length for the main story if you don't rush through it, but there's a ton of side objectives and quests and collecting you can go and do or afterwards, which then takes it up to about 35 or so hours that you can really sink into the game. And going back to that linear system, it means that you can unlock more of the world you're in, as I mentioned, but also your character and the weaponry. It does become a lot stronger as you progress. So the game is always changing the more you move forward, which does help it to feel less repetitive, because in terms of what you do, the majority of it, as you may have guessed, is just slashing and shooting through a ton of zombies. So the array of weapons and materials and other items that you can always collect as you play, it does help it to become more varied in your gameplay, because with the scrap you collect, that can be used in many ways, such as upgrading, repairing and fabricating all your weapons. Now that could be melee weapons or actual guns, which you can unlock. I'd like to say it's just before you reach halfway through the story, so you definitely get that survival feeling, because you aren't given them straight away. You actually have to earn them. The same goes with Dying Light 2. And not to say that it doesn't get a little bit repetitive, I've felt that a few times in my playthrough, which is fine. I usually do feel that way with survival games and their gameplay system. It's mainly because the story and the narrative sort of takes over, so it balances it out. But with this game, the story wasn't anything insane, and that's most likely why I thought that. I'll get onto the story later, but I do want to talk about the puzzles in this game, which again adds on to that survival gameplay which you do expect. Now, it is a lot of unlocking several blocked pathways and doors so you can go further. I wouldn't say they're too difficult to understand. If anything, I really don't mind puzzles in games, as long as they're varied, which they could be a bit more in this game. However, if you aren't up to do a task, you can easily just go back and explore other areas to collect more loot or do some side quests, so it's more forgiving and not so linear. There's a ton of weapons you can collect and upgrade, from pieces of wood to baseball bats, to steel pipes, to knives and machetes, but also curveballs, which are just throwable items that could be, ninja stars or explosives. It's definitely melee focused in the gameplay, which I think is a good thing, because the zombies aren't gonna put up much of a fight when you're shooting them all the time, and that would become a bit boring. However, in the melee system, if anything, it's quite simple in terms of the different attacks and moves you can do. It's more about how you utilize them, as in where you strike on the zombie and the different combinations you can use. Then there's a few finishers and animations where zombies grab you and you have to fight them off. And overall, it does give a fair challenge, I must say, and it isn't as laid back as I thought it would be, which I think is a good thing. I must say, they did nail it in the visuals of the gameplay, especially in the combat system. Just the detail they put into the zombies themselves and their design, but also the way they die and the way they fight. It is excessively gory, as you may expect, tons of blood and guts everywhere as you slash through them. And I think that's probably the biggest aspect of the game. I think that's what people were most excited for when they teased it all the way back in, I'd say 2014, I think it was. Just the look of the gameplay and its attention to detail. You can also implement parts of the environment, so mainly explosives, or fire, water, or even electricity as well, to help take down zombies. And most of the time, combining multiple elements like water and electricity will then provide even more damage because it creates this whole reaction, and you'll have to use that in some ways to unlock areas or paths. Now, looking more into the upgrade system of Dead Island 2, there's two categories of perks and mods. So the perks are definitely more rare and can be found in blueprints on the workbenches across the map, taking down bigger enemies or trading items. There's normal and then there's zombie weapon perks. So normal has, for example, damaging, enhanced, lightweight, reinforced, etc., which increases certain areas as in damage, speed, durability. And the zombie ones are more general sort of boost, so agility, infectious and restoring, that will increase agility and stamina and bleeding damage to zombies. And again, you can fabricate these perks by collecting and salvaging around the map, and the loot is very common, I must say. Basically everywhere you look, you can most likely pick up something or search. The same goes with healables as well, like medkits or protein bars for stamina. There is a rarity system, I must say, of the weapons, with more slots for perks depending on its rarity. Now, mods are similar, but add on to your weapon and give it an effect. So similar to COD Zombies, such as an electrocutor mod or a cremator mod for a fire boost. So there's a ton of customization really. Now, to lead on to the story and the narrative, at the start of the game you get to choose between a selection of characters, and they also benefit your gameplay differently. So the perks you choose may help you more depending on your chosen character, because they have weaknesses and strengths. Choosing from Carla, Jacob, Ryan, Danny, Bruno and Amy, they all have their different stats. I won't go through them all because I'll speak on the one that I chose, which is Jacob. And the main reason for that was just because he's on the main cover and I just assumed he was the main guy. But there's no correct choice really, and they just vary in their categories with different numbers for each, so you base it on your playstyle. So Jacob is quite good, to be honest, like overall, but his main weakness is the few types of zombies that have elemental damage to them. So there's radioactive ones, there's fire ones, and the characters you choose from are known as the Slayers, who are basically the heroes, and fight off this apocalypse which they're in the middle of, as the military is almost incapable due to the amount of intense earthquakes that keep happening. It's not covered too much, but that is the main reason. So it's basically up to just the Slayers themselves, who then come across many families and celebrities, I guess, and just the last survivalists in general trying to hold on or escape the area to then outlast this outbreak. And the Slayers are there to basically help them. But this means that there's a wide series of characters you meet and interact with, and they really chose them well, I must say. Such variety in them, and each one is so different to the other. They didn't miss anyone. And before going into the game, a lot of survival games like this don't really need much of a complex story to them. It's usually a case of the set of characters, funny enough, trying to survive with a series of complications that get in the way without any spoilers, and then there's not much else to it. So I wasn't fully invested into the story. I didn't mind it. I think the characters were quite funny. If anything, that is my main takeaway, that it was a fun experience and definitely had that comedic value to it. And of course the running commentary from your main character as you play the game, which is a bit exaggerative, but they usually are in these type of games, but it just adds a lot to it. And overall, it was a fun experience. In terms of if you should buy the game, of course it is more on the expensive side because it's so recent. I think it's worth it for some people. It depends on how much a fan you are of survival games. I think if you're a really big fan, then you probably already would have got this game. But either way, if you aren't or you are, the missions could become repetitive for some. It's more up to you on how you want to play the game, to be honest. And it is decent, I must say, and I definitely had a fun time playing it. Hopefully from just what I've covered in this video, you can reach a decision. It's never really easy to give a yes or no answer, but let me know in the comments what you think. I also know the game has many DLCs now added to it since its original launch, so even more content, though I know I don't own them so I can't fully speak on it. But if you did enjoy this video, then let me know by tapping that like button down below. And if you enjoy single player and also multiplayer games as well, then that's what this channel does focus on. I have various playlists on a selection of games, so you can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to. And if you want to support me any further by becoming a member at either level 1 or 2 to gain access to various perks, then tap the join button on the channel. Thank you all for the support and watching until the very end. And that was Dead Island 2 in 2025, and bye bye.